Deputy Earl Whitmore was born into legacy, one drenched in the blood and sweat of men who fought to keep the old ways alive. His grandfather, William Bill Whitmore, had been a high-ranking Klansman, a grand dragon in Alabama's most feared KKK sect. The stories of power, control, and purity were whispered to Earl as bedtime stories, shaping him long before he understood the weight of the badge he would one day wear. Earl walked the path his family carved out for him, molded by doctrine, tradition, and the belief that law enforcement was not just a job, but a tool, a shield for men like him to keep black people in order. He wasn't alone in this mindset. Travis Tripp Langley, his childhood best friend, shared his convictions. Their grandfathers had stood side by side in white hoods, burning crosses and striking fear into the hearts of black families across town. The boys had grown up together, running through Confederate graveyards, practicing their aim on tin cans while their fathers coached them on handling future threats. Now, as men, they had traded their Klansman robes for police uniforms. Different attire, same purpose. Now cops, they felt like they were above the law, and their clan was their shield. Over the years, they had gotten away with oppressing black people. But on one fateful Tuesday, March 12, 2024, they would, however, get the shock of their lives when they harassed 14-year-old Maya Brooks. And nothing prepared them for the shock they received when they found out that her father was the Chief Justice of the Federation. By the end of this story, they would learn a grave lesson. Before we get into this story, I do like to give a shout out to this subscriber, Kim Ann Craig. If you would like a shout out in my next story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Also, if you enjoy these types of heartfelt stories about justice, racism, and equality, hit the subscribe button so you don't miss the next story when it drops. Now let's get into the story. One Tuesday afternoon, Maya Brooks was playing in the park. The sun was warm, and the soft breeze rustled the trees. Laughter echoed all around, children running, climbing, and chasing each other across the playground. Maya, just 14 years old, sat on the swings, gently kicking her feet against the dirt. She had come here many times before, and though she was the only black girl in the park, she didn't let that bother her. In fact, she didn't even notice it. Her security detail, a plainclothes officer assigned to watch over her, had stepped away for a moment to take a phone call. He wasn't far, just a few steps beyond the fence, his back turned slightly as he spoke into his phone. Maya didn't mind. She was used to the presence of security, but never felt like she needed it. She was just a kid in a park, enjoying the afternoon like everyone else. She pumped her legs a little harder, making the swing rise higher. The wind rushed past her face, and for a moment, she closed her eyes, enjoying the feeling of weightlessness. She had no reason to be afraid, no reason to feel out of place. But someone else noticed. A few feet away, two white police officers leaned against their patrol car, watching. They had seen her the moment they pulled up. A young black girl, alone in a mostly white neighborhood park. That was enough for them. One of them nudged the other. "What do we have here?" Maya, unaware of the eyes on her, laughed softly to herself as she swung higher. She had no idea that this afternoon would change everything. They watched her for a moment, noting how she was the only black person in the park, surrounded by white children. The park was far from quiet. The air was filled with the joyful sounds of children's voices and the squeak of swing sets, but Maya remained alone on the swings. The officers exchanged a glance before stepping out of the car, their heavy boots crunching on the gravel path as they walked toward her. Their eyes remained fixed on her as they approached, scanning her every move, as though her presence was something to be questioned. As the officers drew closer, their intent became clear. "Hey there," Officer Whitmore called, his voice gruff and commanding, cutting through the air. "What are you doing here all alone?" Maya looked up, slightly startled but composed. She wasn't used to being questioned like this, but she responded with ease. "Just playing," she said, her voice steady. Officer Langley eyed her with visible suspicion, his arms crossed. "You know, this park isn't really for people like you to be alone in." Maya's brow furrowed in confusion. What did that mean? She had come here for years, and it had never been an issue. "What do you mean?" she asked, her tone now laced with confusion. Officer Whitmore stepped closer, his posture growing more threatening. "Where's your family? Your parents?" Maya's stomach tightened, but she didn't let it show. Her security detail was nearby, but they were out of sight. "They're on their way. I'm just waiting for them," she explained. But the officers weren't satisfied with her answers. Their questions became more aggressive, more forceful. Officer Langley stepped forward, his voice hardening. "We don't like people like you hanging around here." Maya's heart raced. She tried to stay calm, but there was a feeling in the air that she couldn't ignore. Her mind was racing, but before she could speak again, Officer Whitmore slapped her across the face with a sudden, swift motion. The blow sent Maya stumbling backward. Her knee hit the ground hard, scraping against the grass. Blood began to trickle from the small cut on her knee, but she didn't cry out. The sting of the physical pain was nothing compared to the rising sense of injustice. She had to act quickly. Her hands shook as she reached for her phone, dialing her father's number. "Daddy, they're hurting me. Please come." Her father, Chief Justice Malcolm Brooks, was always her rock. He had taught her how to handle difficult situations, how to stand tall in the face of adversity. Maya had learned to stay calm under pressure, to never let fear take hold, no matter how challenging the circumstances. But she had never imagined it would come to this, a moment when she would need to call for help, not from a family member, but from the law itself. As she spoke to her father, the officers stood still, their eyes never leaving her. Maya could hear their murmurs, their disbelief at her defiance. The way they sneered and whispered to each other. They didn't know who she was or who her father was, but soon they would find out. Within moments, the sound of a car pulling up cut through the tension. The officers turned, startled by the arrival. The atmosphere in the park shifted instantly. Chief Justice Malcolm Brooks stepped out of his car, his face cold and unreadable. His eyes were sharp, and there was no hesitation in his steps. The moment the officers saw him, their faces paled. They recognized him instantly. They had heard of him before, of his unwavering stance on justice, of his reputation for dismantling corruption, and his expertise in the legal system. They knew this was no ordinary man. But it was too late to back down now. Without a moment's hesitation, Chief Justice Brooks turned to the officers, his voice low but filled with authority. "Arrest these officers," he ordered firmly, the weight of his words carrying a gravity that silenced the park. His presence alone made it clear justice would be served. The shock on Officer Whitmore and Officer Langley's faces was palpable as they tried to talk their way out of the situation. Their voices trembled with the desperation of men caught in a moment they hadn't prepared for. They stammered, attempting to justify their actions, claiming they were just doing their jobs, enforcing the law. But Maya's father, Chief Justice Malcolm Brooks, wasn't having any of it. His piercing gaze cut through their excuses as though they were made of paper. Without hesitation, he pulled out his phone and immediately called for backup. Within minutes, the situation escalated. Additional officers arrived, and the two men were swiftly handcuffed and detained. The air around the park was thick with tension, the weight of the moment making everything feel surreal. Maya, though still shaken, watched as the officers who had hurt her were led away. It was a small victory, but one that signaled a bigger battle ahead. As the investigation into the officers' actions began, the true depth of their involvement came to light. A thorough investigation revealed something horrifying. Officer Whitmore and Officer Langley weren't just ordinary cops. Both officers were descendants of Ku Klux Klan members, a dark family legacy that had been passed down through generations. They had been raised with the same vile doctrines of hate that had long been a part of their ancestors' lives. Over the years, they had used their positions in law enforcement to intimidate, oppress, and harm marginalized communities, often going unchecked due to their deep ties to powerful, racist organizations. The truth came crashing down. The officers were charged with assault and battery, and after a series of court proceedings, they were sentenced to 4 years in prison. Their past had finally caught up with them, and justice was delivered, not just for Maya, but for the countless others they had wronged. Let this story serve as a reminder. Never judge someone by the color of their skin or the clothes they wear. Everyone carries a story, and assumptions can blind us to their truth. What did you think of the story? Did it challenge your perspective? Join the conversation in the comments, and let's make a difference together. If you enjoyed it, be sure to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Your support helps us share more stories that provoke thought and inspire change. Let's keep building a world where understanding triumphs over prejudice. In a world that often refuses to see, it's up to us to make them listen. The end.